The president today had the opportunity to deny, when asked about it directly, whether or not he's been recording private conversations in the White House. He did not deny it, nor did his spokesman Sean Spicer earlier in the day. It could be a bluff, it could be a taunt, it could be a threat, and it could be that Donald Trump is recording conversations in the White House and just opened himself up to a massive subpoena claim. Today's saga started early this morning when the president got a hold of his phone and said on Twitter, quote, "James Comey better hope that there are no tapes," in quotes, of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press. The president was angry that Comey's version of their White House dinner has started to emerge. We broke some of the details on this broadcast just last night. In plain English, some of what the president described of that evening, like the very idea that Comey would ask to have dinner or that he would ask to stay on, even though he was just 4 years into a 10-year term, some of that didn't sound at all like the James Comey his friends and associates have come to know. And so those friends and associates have started talking to the news media. The White House has been stung this week after first pushing the story that Comey was fired because he'd been mean to Hillary Clinton, only to have the president come out and blurt out to Lester Holt that he had already decided to fire Comey. The president now owns that, and he certainly now owns this subject of possibly recorded conversations. He has now been asked directly about it and took a pass. Here is the clip in question with Jeanine Pirro of Fox News for an interview to air Saturday.
What about the idea that in a tweet you said that there might be tape recordings?
Well, that I can't talk about. I won't talk about that. All I want is for Comey to be honest, and I hope he will be, and I'm sure he will be, I hope.
Prior to hearing from the president that he was going to take a pass on that question, this question of Trump recording his private conversations came up more than once at today's press briefing, and more than once, as we mentioned, spokesman Sean Spicer took a pass.
Did President Trump record his conversations with former FBI Director Comey?
I assume you're referring to the tweet, and I've talked to the president. The president has nothing further to add on that.
And why did he say that? Why did he tweet that? What should we interpret from that?
As I mentioned, the president has nothing further to add on that.
Are there recording devices in the Oval Office or in the residence?
As I said for the third time, there is nothing further to add on that.
Does he think it's appropriate to threaten someone like Mr. Comey not to speak?
I don't think that's not a threat. He's simply stated a fact. The tweet speaks for itself. I'm moving on.
I just want to put a fire point on Jeff's question. I'm hoping you can answer this in a yes or no fashion. Is the President of the United States currently recording conversations taking place in the Oval Office?
I think the point that I made with respect to the tweet is the president has no further comment on this.
As you might imagine, Democrats on the Hill are now demanding to know if recordings exist, and if so, how quickly they can get their hands on copies. They're also calling for new hearings to more broadly investigate Comey's firing. A source close to Comey told our own Ken Dilanian that Comey would be delighted for there to be a record of what he said at dinner with Trump. This source told Dilanian, quote, "He hopes there are tapes. That would be perfect." Either way, the Comey pushback is underway on this day 113 of the Trump administration because, again, those close to the man with the studied bearing of Eliot Ness found it so hard to believe that he would have reassured the president that he is somehow not under investigation, not once and certainly not 3 times. Let's bring in our kickoff panel tonight. The veteran New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker is with us, who we are happy to say also happens to be our own most newly minted MSNBC political analyst. We welcome back to the broadcast Vivian Salamo, White House reporter for the Associated Press. We also welcome back to the broadcast Politico White House reporter Matthew Nussbaum. Peter, to a lot of people that was chilling. I can't talk about that. I won't talk about that. You reacted in real time in the importance I thought was appropriate. You think this is a very serious moment right there.
Well, I do. It's very striking. I mean, look, it's been 40 years since we had a president that we knew of anyway who was recording on any regular basis, tape recording his conversations. And there's a reason why other presidents haven't done it. That's because it didn't work out so well for Richard Nixon, obviously. And the idea that he's sort of holding out there is either he is in fact secretly taping conversations with the FBI director of all people, or he's bluffing or he's misleading in order to intimidate somebody who might have information that he considers to be damaging against him. Either scenario is pretty stunning, I think, for any White House.
Vivian, this would appear to be a second straight interview done perhaps outside the authority and track of the press shop in the West Wing. Lester Holt and then Jeanine Pirro. In 2 straight interviews, the president has made news. In 3 separate depictions of the West Wing, I have read about a dark place this week, a place where people who did not want to encounter the president had their doors closed. What can you speak to the mood at the end of this week?
That's right. His inner circle seems to be getting smaller and smaller. Trump has been a lot more reclusive in the last couple of days. He's been holding far less public events than normal. Even when he did, you know, they were sort of these events that were not sort of the norm that we would expect. Remember, we had Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, at the White House a couple of days ago. The press was called in to go see what we thought was going to be Lavrov and Trump together, and perhaps even Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, who has been at the center of so many of the controversies surrounding the Trump administration. Of course, we walked in and you could hear the gasps because there was no Lavrov, there was no Kislyak. It was actually Henry Kissinger sitting in the chair with the president. He only spoke to us for a couple of seconds, and that was really the most we've really seen of him. He had brief public statements today, but he's really been standoffish as far as the people he's talking to. Some of the people who have been with him since the very beginning, we're told, relatives and the closest advisors that have been sort of the original staff of his campaign. His inner circle is getting smaller. He's apparently getting very tense with the situation, that they can't sort of shake off the whole Russia allegation. And so it's really an interesting time, and definitely can be felt, the tension throughout the White House.
And Matthew, let's talk about the Comey angle. Respectfully, he is a man who would insert the word integrity in every sentence he utters publicly if he thought he could. He has now been accused of what the president has ascribed to him, and that is saying 3 times, reassuring the president, you're not the subject of an investigation. Let's talk about, call it Comey's revenge, and how you think that's going to play out now.
Well, basically what we have is Donald Trump's credibility versus that of James Comey, and I'm not sure if that's a fight Donald Trump wants to pick. James Comey, for all the controversies he's been a part of, remains a respected figure, certainly among the FBI and among law enforcement and among some on Capitol Hill. And the idea that he's the one pushing these false narratives and it's the president who's the one delivering the truth on this, seems a little dubious to a lot of people, and all the more so because the president's been acting so defensive, making this veiled or not so veiled threat about recording their conversations. And then, of course, the quote you showed of someone close to Comey saying, I hope there are tapes. So, again, in a credibility battle, I'm not sure if that's one that Trump comes out on top.
Peter, we've all been talking for 16 weeks now of this administration that the president is not shall we say, an institutionalist. He is not among those of us who have been steeped in history and the ways of the president just because we've learned a lot about it and find it interesting. He came from another world. Does that explain the fact that he apparently did not know what his words, in neither confirming nor denying record, the kind of scrutiny that that brief appearance with Jeanine Pirro would bring?
Well, I do think you need to remember this is the first president who's never served a minute in elective office before now and never been in the military before now. And this is all new to him. This is both a strength and a weakness. It's a strength, obviously, because people who support him love the fact that he's shaking up the system. And when they see everybody kind of pile on, like Washington is doing this week, they get defensive on his behalf and say, well, that's just because he's trying to drain the swamp. It's obviously a weakness in the sense that he doesn't really understand sort of where the pitfalls are that many national politicians would. Most politicians would understand that even hinting at the idea of a secret taping system would raise all sorts of illusions and echoes that you normally wouldn't want to raise. Most presidents try to avoid the Nixon comparison. They don't go around seeming to invite it. And as you pointed out, with the appearance with Henry Kissinger, with the firing of a lead person investigating his campaign people, and now this, it's sort of unavoidable. You know, the other question is, who does he listen to? Is there anybody out there who can get to him and make him understand why there might be consequences to the kind of things he does on Twitter or in these interviews? The answer seems to be no at the moment.
And Vivian, what steps were taken to further and enhance the Trump legislative agenda today or at any time this week?
It's really hard to say. A lot of the communications have been surrounding this issue about firing Director Comey. As far as any of the major items on the agenda that he's trying to carry out, sort of further his health care bill, the tax plan, things like that. Everything is sort of, they're still rolling, but there isn't a lot of attention because so much energy and effort is going into this whole issue of Director Comey being abruptly fired and the Russia investigation. And I just want to point out something that Peter said earlier. It's really important to remember that, again, is it a bluff or is there really evidence of something concrete? This is the same president who a couple of weeks ago threw out very serious wiretapping allegations against his predecessor, President Barack Obama. And yet we still have never seen those claims substantiated. And so, again, we have this situation now where there's so much energy going into these claims that have no evidence to back them up. And so it's engaging even people on the Hill. Our lawmakers are being engaged by this, where you're having to reopen investigations and dedicate so many resources into these issues. And then President Trump gets really angry when they get so much attention. But it's sort of a vicious cycle that we're leading. And so that's where we are now. And it's really fascinating to watch, but it's also very troubling for a lot of people who do want to see him fulfill his campaign promises.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.